Hey everybody, we're going to get started on newsletters. Woo! Newsletters. All right, we are here to talk about how to build a successful newsletter strategy. We know that many of you have one. We have lots of examples and ways to pay for your newsletters and help your newsletters pay for your newsroom. And use them to build membership and engagement and all kinds of good things. So, I'm Irene McKisson. I'm the principal executive of Arizona Luminaria. We are a new nonprofit in Arizona. We just launched in February and started publishing. Woo! Before that, I worked 18 years in a legacy newspaper where I built and ran 6 or 7 newsletter products, and I've probably written thousands and thousands, like many of you, of newsletters. And I'm here with Heidi.
Morning, I'm Heidi Thompson. I'm an independent consultant. I work with about a dozen nonprofit and faith-based media organizations. For the last 5 years, I've been doing that. Before that, I was the publisher and CEO at Religion News Service and the publisher at Sojourners.
Hi, and I'm Kim Bode. I'm the Director of Audience and News Product at Devex, and I'm also a freelance newsletter consultant. So I work with news organizations and NGOs around the world on figuring out their newsletter questions and any kind of opportunities that they might not be realizing yet. Okay, so let's dive right in. So before my current role, I was a product manager for newsletters at the LA Times. Where it was actually the California Times, so it was the LA Times, the San Diego Union Tribune, and a few community papers. So it was about 50 newsletters and email products that I would oversee from the product side. We would use newsletters, of course, as probably many of you, to distribute your journalism and use sort of like the modern paper format, right? But the great thing about newsletters is that you can really also use it to branch into new topic areas, reach new audiences, and use that really as a lead generator and building loyalty, right? Because newsletters are habitual products, and so therefore, you're like consistently showing up within their inboxes. Hopefully, you get them to convert sooner or later to subscribers, donors, members. And you also have another product to attract new advertisers. So you can see here a couple of examples on the side, which were newsletter products that we launched while I was there, which were sort of like new approaches or like new, not really verticals, but more new beats that we didn't have before that we kind of used the newsletter to first branch out. And they were quite successful in terms of building new audiences and attracting advertisers as well.
Mine is also, so all of these examples are kind of about that building engagement piece, right? So how can you use a newsletter to connect more deeply with your audiences and to build that habit? Newsletters are so great for that. So this example is an unconventional one in that we built this newsletter in the community engagement cycle. So we had a question, as I know many of you do, when somebody becomes a member, you ask, why did you do that? Why did you give us your money? And we kept seeing over and over, people were saying, I'm new to the city of Tucson, which is where I'm based, and your product helped me get settled, to become a little bit of an insider, and I loved it so much, I gave you money. And so we thought, well, we could build a product that does that more thoughtfully, and perhaps we could then convert people more thoughtfully. So we built this newsletter course called How to Tucson with a hat tip to Texas Tribune, who has a very similar titled newsletter. And so as I talked about that kind of engagement cycle, right, like this came directly out of feedback from users. So we then took it back to users. So in building that product, we went back to users, literally the email addresses of people who had said to us, I gave you money because you helped me get settled in this city. We reached back out to them and said, hey, we have a newsletter we're thinking about building. Could I talk to you about it? And we did the user research with them. We showed them the product, and we changed the product based on what they said. And so the success metrics for that newsletter in particular were really about membership conversions because it was born out of that membership goal. So we were very thoughtful about where we placed membership asks in that course. It was a 12-email course that allows you to get to know your city better. And so our goals were to convert people to membership, and we were converting people in that email course at like 10 to 12% higher than any of our other methods of converting members, because it came out of that thoughtful cycle of like, how are people becoming members and how can we be more thoughtful about that? So it's something you can all think about as well. Like, what are people saying when they become members, and is there a newsletter product you can develop out of that feedback? The growth strategy for that too was we had lots of stories that people were accessing via search, and our hypothesis was people who are searching out stories about kind of Tucson's culture and Tucson's inner workings are newcomers. And so we would put the CTA, the ask, the call to action to sign up for this newsletter course on those stories, and it was very successful. We also used Facebook lead gen ads, which we'll talk about in a bit.
So we're familiar with using newsletters as lead generators to acquire new readers and as loyalty builders, right, to build stickiness with that, create that habit. But every once in a while, you might actually develop a newsletter product that has such stickiness, such loyalty, that you could turn it into a paid subscription product on its own. And that's what happened to my client, Christian Century. Christian Century covers news for Protestant Christians in the U.S., and they had a weekly Sundays Coming email newsletter, which was really targeted at preachers who are getting ready to preach that Sunday. That started out as a free lead-generating kind of newsletter, and was so popular that we were able to turn it into a paid newsletter product. So we kept the free version, it's kind of a skinny version, and then we created a richer paid version, which is $4.95 a month, and that now creates about $50,000 in revenue for the Century.
So newsletters as membership drivers, How to Tucson was an example of that. A more generic example of that is asking in your regular newsletter products. I feel like this one gets lost, so I wanted to pull it up to the top. I was a newspaper designer for a long time, and we used to call those, the promos that were sitting all over the newspaper that would tell you to go do stuff, the reefers and the promos and all those boxes. They became furniture. People read over them because it's the same words in the same place all the time. And so it's like your table, right? You don't walk into your table because you know the table's there, but you're not looking at the table, really. So I think membership CTAs can become furniture in your newsletters, and so we work really hard to mix them up, to use emojis to surprise people, to use very voicey, very like, use your voice, use the voice that you use with members, talk to them as if you were talking to a person, and change it. So the two examples you see here, one is from a food newsletter. You can see all the food emojis that we're using and the giant capital letters, changing the fonts, putting links in, and you can see at the bottom as well, we're using a nice big orange button, and we're using the little sparkles, and we're using our bilingual language, and we're using exclamation points. Whatever you have to do to kind of change it up and make it look different so that people don't ignore it or don't bump into it like the coffee table. So we know that newsletter lists are where people will become members, and I think that's pretty common knowledge at this point, but for them to be that, you have to keep asking. And it's not just about the drip campaigns, right? It's not just about all of those campaign emails we're all about to send for Newsmatch. It's also about asking every day in your regular products and asking in a way that people don't get used to it and forget that you're asking them, right?
So here's just two examples of what Irene is talking about in terms of asking all the time. On the left is the header, email header that's at the top of Anabaptist World's Saturday news roundup email that goes out every Saturday morning. We're using a variable or conditional text in MailChimp, and if you're a member, you get a nice heart emoji and a thank you for being a member. And if you're not a member, then you get an ask. And I love Irene's recommendation to change it up. In fact, we're going to do that on Monday. On the right-hand side is another example. National Catholic Reporter is a national newspaper. They just relaunched a redesigned website last week, and the publisher there, Bill Mitchell, used that as an opportunity to ask for membership. So 2 emails went out that morning, one to all the existing members saying, thank you for being a member. When you go to the site today, you're going to notice something different. We've relaunched the new site. Thank you. And prospects, meaning non-members, got a different message, the one you see here, which was an announcement about the redesign and an invitation to become a member. So turning every possible opportunity into a chance to either thank or ask.
Sponsorship. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about how newsletters can bring members. That's one way to bring in revenue through newsletters. It can become habitual. You're building the bottom of your funnel. This is a direct line as well to money as it relates to newsletters, and one that I think a lot of us don't take advantage of. So selling an ad into a newsletter, we call ours sponsor messages, and they look like this, the example that you see there, where there's a photo or logo, a little headline, and a little blurb. It looks very much like it looks like part of the newsletter, and that's by design. It's also set off as a sponsor message. We sell these at a flat rate, which is, I think, really helpful for lots and lots of startups where you don't have an enormous 100,000 person email list. You can still sell ads into your newsletter because what you're doing is you have a very engaged, very loyal audience sitting in your newsletter. Like, that's a valuable audience. This is Tucson. Our sponsor messages, we were selling, at the end, we were selling 2 into each newsletter because we couldn't get the price high enough because people really wanted to buy them. We were selling those at $500 a piece, 2 positions in the newsletter, and we increased the rate and the volume. So at Luminaria, we are just starting to sell sponsored newsletters. We're doing some trade to get started, which I think is a tip that's really helpful. You don't know what you're doing yet, you want to put a newsletter ad in, start with just an ask sitting in that position, like build the position out and say, do you want your business's message to reach many engaged local people? Send me an email, and then make a trade with somebody and put their ad in there and start tracking it. That's another tip. Make sure you're putting a UTM code or you're throwing that link through Bitly or whatever it is so that you can track how many people click through that ad, because click-through rates on newsletters are very high. For us, This is Tucson, where we did hundreds of these, we were averaging 3 to 10% click-through rates on ads, which if you serve ads and you know that display ads are like 0.05%, that's very high. And it's because we were very thoughtful about the advertisers we were inviting into the newsletter. We were making sure they were aligned with the newsletter audience. And we were also making them look a little bit like content and making them relevant for people. Also making sure that they had links and that the call to action of the advertiser was really strong, like go sign up today.
Two other pieces of thinking about advertising and email newsletters. One is to not undervalue what you're selling in a newsletter. The sponsored emails that my clients are selling, that is actually their most valuable advertising product. So we try to price that. We think comparable to, like, what would a full page ad in a print product be? Like, it's that valuable. Sponsored emails are very trackable, they're quick, advertisers really like them. It's very easy for them to figure out if that product is going to work for what they're trying to sell, and then they're willing to pay a premium for it. So some of my clients are charging $100 per 1,000 emails sent. So if you've got an email list of 10,000 names, that's a $1,000 product. On email ads, or ads that are in your email newsletter, it's very easy because those are smaller, and advertisers who are maybe new to advertising don't want to pay a lot for that. It's very easy to fall into a trap of spending a lot of time on that and not pricing it high enough to make it worth the time, right? You got to get the creative, you got to make sure it meets the specs, you got to run the ads, and then you got to turn around and send out all the reports on that. So you want to price that at a way that you're actually covering the time that you're going to spend on that. And so the way to do that is to do bundles. And a bundle could be website advertising, newsletter advertising, and a sponsored email, or it could be a frequency package, right? We're going to run this ad 6 times over the next 6 weeks, or you get 6 ads like this over the next year, but price that at such a way and sell it at such a way that you're actually making money and not losing it on your ad program, which is easy to do.
Plus 100.
All right, yeah, so now we're diving into growing your newsletter lists. Because obviously, no matter what strategy you deploy with each individual newsletter product you have, whether you want to use them as loyalty drivers, engagement, to generate additional ad revenue, or all of these things together, the more readers you can reach, and the more relevant the readers are, of course, the better it is, right? So one thing that I always tell people where to start is when you look at growing your newsletter list. Where are you currently getting most of your new signups from? So if you can look at you might already have all these different sign-up placements around your own platform, perhaps off-platform as well. If you look at where your newsletter subscribers are coming from, this might already give you a clue where you can invest in more, where you can tweak it a little bit, or where you want to branch into where you're not present yet. And then you can identify opportunities for improving, testing, and ideating. So we're going to go over a few examples of on-platform, off-platform, maximizing touch points, and then during registration and checkout flow. So on-platform, that's probably your website. You want to make sure that you make it very easy for visitors and users who come to your website to know that you have a relevant newsletter product available for them, or several relevant newsletter products. And you want to make it as easy as possible for them to sign up, right? So one way to do that would be to have just an input field and a subscribe button or a sign up button. If you have logged in members, you might even think about a one-click sign up. And you can really embed these sign-up forms within the article, at the bottom of an article, and the right rail, left rail. There are pop-ups and toasters, floating bars, all kinds of things that you can try out. And I mean, to Irene's point earlier, users do get blind, right? They've seen it, they've seen these placements. They might actually confuse it maybe with an ad. So I always say, you can sprinkle in rather more than not enough, because users might not, they just glance over it. They might not ever get to the bottom of the article, what have you. So I would really urge everyone to just, keep on adding them in and keep tweaking them, keep updating them, and really grab people's attention and show the value, of course, of the newsletters for what they're getting.
Do you have a number that you recommend? Do you say you should have 5 email asks in an article, or?
I mean, I think it depends on how long the article is, right? But some longer feature stories, I think it's fine to put 3 in there and the pop-up maybe, but be smart about it, right? So it shouldn't be annoying. It should, actually add to the user experience or not be too annoying.
And it's great if you have the technology to suppress those for people who are already on your list.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the best thing to have. Okay, so moving on to off-platform, you want to maximize, any kind of following that you have already established, for example, on your social profiles, as well as within your newsletters. So, you might, if you have the chance to add it to your social profiles, space usually is very limited. So, there might be competing interests, but if you do have the chance, why not mention the newsletter there as well? Really just think about any opportunity you have where you're touching your audience. They should know that you have a newsletter, and it should be easy for them to sign up, as well as maybe share it with their friends and family and colleagues. So a couple of examples, Twitter profile, LinkedIn has this pretty neat sign up button. And then, of course, within your newsletters, you also want to keep reminding people that they can share it with their community to drive growth that way. And then one other thing that you can think about as well, and I've seen actually more and more organizations do that, is to implement a newsletter sign up during the registration or checkout flow. This can be, by way of just adding a checkbox or several checkboxes. Some organizations are actually using now auto-subscribe. So I've seen this more and more. You want to be careful with that because it really depends on what are users registering for. You could possibly even have it as part of an event registration. But in any case, wherever you have it, you want to be really upfront and transparent that users are signing up for the newsletter and make it easy for them to unsubscribe later or during the process. Because the last thing you want is just, add people to the list unknowingly and make it hard for them to unsubscribe, because then, if they don't engage or if they flag it as spam, that'd be the worst case scenario. So you really don't want that. That said, I think during registration and checkout flow is a huge untapped potential that I think we're just kind of getting into as an industry.
You can assume too, right? If somebody's becoming a member or they're giving you their money, that they're more likely to become members at that point, right? Or they already are.
Yeah, and it's a big part of the membership, right? Or the subscription. It's this is how you're getting what you're paying for or why you're buying into this. So I think it makes sense.
We did a test at National Catholic Reporter looking at which of their, at that point, almost 15 email newsletters would do the best job at getting new folks to join the list. So we used a tool, Opt-in Monster, relatively inexpensive, very easy to use, to do split tests. And we tested 3 of their largest newsletters, the Francis Chronicles, which is a cartoon about Pope Francis along with some headlines, the regular news updates email, which goes out a couple times a week, and then a new newsletter just about culture, movies, film, etc. So each of these are a different door into the publication. They attract different people. But which one would be the most effective at getting new folks to sign up? And to no one's surprise, it was the cartoon. Francis Chronicles, hands down, was about a 40% lift in signups when we tested it.
I would also just add there, when we've done this testing as well, images, images, always. Okay, so you've done your organic, you've put your message in every place, you've asked, you make sure it's not furniture, you have done all the things. What if you want to pay for lead generation? What are your options? We use Facebook lead generation ads. This is an example of one that was just very super successful for us. Part of that is because we made it look like the news. It looks like a news story. It is a news story. I literally just took the Instagram feed where we were putting our Instagram stories, and I used those as the images for this lead generation campaign. So it is the news. And I picked 5 of them, just 5 that I thought were things or stories that I knew our audience had been very engaged with in the first place. I chose those 5 and I turned them into ads. So with Facebook lead gen, you connect it to a form. It is very frictionless, where somebody can sign up for your email list very easily on Facebook or Instagram, which is also a key here. So it's not just the Facebook ad, audience network that you're reaching. It's also the Instagram network, which is a little bit younger. So spend more if you can over a longer period of time, because you have more chance to figure out what's working, first of all. You have another chance to get the acquisition price down, and you have you can get more bang for your buck. And experiment with a bunch of different creatives like we did. There were a couple that were way outperforming some of the others, which is helpful information in a couple ways. If you're using your news stories, it gives you a little bit of information about what people are interested in, right? So it gives you a little bit of editorial feedback. But it also tells you what is making somebody sign up for my newsletter, which is also fascinating. So for us, this one about the no-tell motel, and we had another one about drought that was really popular and was driving a lot of newsletter signups. So there's some insights in there as well. not just the kind of lead generation that we got from that.
Yeah, and another way to do that is to pay for lead generation would be Google Ads. So that's when, users are searching on Google and the sponsored ad pops up like right up top. There's an example there for some of our newsletters. And here as well, I think, you want to set yourself up to get the acquisition cost down with a little bit of runway, right? Like you want to like test and ideate and really keep a close eye on what the cost currently is and how that stacks up against your newsletter lifetime value if you have that. It's really good to have that if you haven't calculated that yet. Because that with any kind of like lead, like paid lead acquisition, you kind of like want to get it at least below your newsletter lifetime value, right? So it's really good to have that. And then with Google Ads, I mean, the way we went about it is we have some like very, very topical, very, very niche B2B newsletters. And so we worked with the newsletter writers and editors on figuring out the right keywords and flipping them around a little bit, also figuring out exactly the copy. Like Google Ads switches it up. Like you put in like a few alternative headlines and copy, and they kind of like find a winning combination. And so then we just started it, and we like monitored it, and like we found actually that the acquisition cost was for some of the newsletters quite high in the beginning, and so we continued to tweak, and all of a sudden like it dropped like way below, and it turned out to be like a super efficient way for us to grow our newsletter list. But then we were also wondering, well, hang on a minute, like we see that we're actually getting, like the price was where we wanted it to be. The number of new subscribers we were getting was like quite significant. But then we were just a little bit unsure, what about the quality of the leads, right? So we want to, at DevX, we want to get in front of global development professionals. So this is a very specific group. And we wanted to make sure that we're actually reaching them through Google Ads. So we looked at this specific segment of users we acquired through Google Ads. And first of all, you just made sure that the email addresses were actually legitimate email addresses. And then even just looked at, the domains, like are there organizations in there, we want to address professionals, right? Like for like local news, this might look a little different because you, one way or another, probably have a lot of Gmails. But then also we even split it up so that we looked at the performance of that email segment. And so are they actually engaging with our newsletters? What's their open rate? And then, of course, if you want to drive them to a membership subscription or donations, you might want to track that down the line as well.
I think that's part of the beauty of using the right keywords or using your news as the ad, is that you know that the people that you're getting into your list came because of that, and so you're more likely to get better alignment in who is actually signing up for the email. So the language is super important because of that.
Yeah, and you can even let's say there's a big event coming up or like a big news story developing, and you have a product like a newsletter that is right fitting in there. Like that's great. People will be searching for that, and you want to get in front of them. So that's like a moment where you probably want to switch it up and see how it's going. And then another way, we talked about newsletter ads earlier, where advertisers come to you and advertise within your newsletters. You can also pay for ads in other newsletters, or even better, you get like some kind of a trade where you don't have to pay for it, but you offer some kind of ad space. It doesn't even have to be your newsletter. Sometimes can be a website or an event or so. But I have seen that if you do advertise or you promote your newsletter within another newsletter or an email product, that usually always converts the best in terms of, maybe not in numbers, but in terms of really getting the right audience, because you're already addressing email readers. That's a big win. And then you also want to, if you want to find an organization where you want to either pay or trade an ad, you of course want to find someone with a newsletter or an email product, an email list essentially, with your target audience, like the audience you want to get in front of, or a segment of it, right? And then, same as with all of these things, keep switching up creative and maybe do it one with image, one without image, and just like see how it's going, track the performance. And if you do pay for it, of course, you also then want to probably calculate how much bang do you get for your buck, and can you tweak it so that ultimately it's worth it and it's like below your newsletter subscriber lifetime value.
I would say for local news organizations, when you're looking for other newsletters to do a trade like this with, there are lots of like civic organizations that might be great fits, right? Like, is there somebody who's covering, who has their own email list, who's like sending out things about the State House? Like, who else is doing the work but maybe not in the journalism space? And you probably know who those people are, and their email lists are probably the same, are very aligned with your email list. We, for example, I showed you the trade earlier, that was with the local startup community is having a conference. Like, that list aligns very directly with the list that we want to access. So that's a good trade for us. So thinking about like who else has those email lists in your community that aren't necessarily other media, but they have lists that you want to access.
And this is an example of a trade like that. America and Commonweal are two national Catholic news organizations. They have close but overlapping audiences, and they did a message exchange. So no money traded hands, no email list traded hands. America sent a message on behalf of Commonweal, and Commonweal sent a message on behalf of America. And because people who tend to subscribe to one magazine or newspaper tend to subscribe to others, this was a really effective way for both organizations to do subscription acquisition. But we've also done these kinds of exchanges for email newsletters and just lead generation. The reason it works, though, is that there is very significant alignment between the mission and the content of these two organizations. So it's very easy to irk your email list if you're sending them ads or sponsored messages that don't align with what they're interested in. Instead, we have the situation with most of the publications that I work with that when we do reader surveys, the surveys come back saying, we actually look forward to the advertising because we find that the advertising really makes sense with what we're interested in or opportunities that we're looking for, and that's what you want for a successful ad program.
I know that sounds wild that like readers would want more advertising, but we also have had the same experience where when your ads are really aligned with your audience and you're giving them advertising that is what they want to see the ads, and they will click through the ads at those insane rates. So like making sure that your advertisers are aligned with who your audience is incredibly important, and to Heidi's point, like makes people want to get those messages and not unsubscribe from your email. My clicker stopped working. No more slides, sorry.
I think you were at the end of it.
Are we?
Anyway.
Well, we have a like how to contact us. We can kind of wrap it up. We do want to ask, we want to offer some questions, and there's microphones here if you all want to kind of walk up there. I think we're probably, I don't think we have any other loose ends we have to get out, do we? Okay.
And maybe while we're getting ready for questions, if our tech support folks could work on that last slide,
To
that
get
would
to
be
the
great.
last slide, yeah, because it has our contact info.
I have a question for the two, for Arain and on the other side. When you mentioned you were charging $500 per ad, was that for each day?
Yeah, for each instance, I guess. So we were selling them, as somebody said, in a package. So we would sell multiple weeks. So you could buy 4 weeks of an ad. This was a weekly newsletter. So the ad was running one per week. It was $500 each week. So each instance of the ad.
And they get one ad in the newsletter and anything else?
Sometimes, so packaging is super helpful, and newsletter ads are, as Heidi pointed out, like really valuable to advertisers, often because they don't have the list that we have. Journal, like, put some value in your list, because we have bigger newsletter lists than most organizations do because we have content. We have so much content. And that's what advertisers want, and it's really hard to build an email list without it. So not undervaluing your email list, absolutely, because advertisers really want that. So it was often the highlight of a package. Somebody wanted a newsletter ad and, oh, yeah, I guess I'll take a website ad too. But the newsletter ad was the thing people wanted.
And your member newsletter, I think you mentioned something like $45,000. Was that about the number you mentioned?
Oh, I think that was the example from the Century. This is a paid newsletter product. We charge $5 a month, $4.95 a month for it. And that right now, that is about a $50,000 a year revenue product for the
Okay.
Century.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was month or year. Thank you.
In a related vein, I'm Mickey from Minnesota Women's Press. I'm curious what your best practices are in terms of encouraging paid news advertisers to do consistency of messaging. It obviously costs money. Or do you try to encourage that, or what do you do?
Consistency as in like appearing regularly or in the actual language, because I have feelings about both of those things.
Oh, yeah. Although, and I guess I'm, showing up 4 times instead of once.
Right.
Yeah.
So we would try to build a package. So when we send a proposal, we would send a proposal that included multiple dates because we were trying to encourage that consistency of message. And that was part of our pitch to them too. It was like, if you appear at more than 4 times at least, you're going to have a much better chance of getting somebody to your event, right? Like, it's the same thing that we have to do. We have to put the message in over and over and over. So it's not a hard sell to marketing folks who understand marketing that your message needs to be in a lot of places. That was another way we sold those packages better too, was like, we know if we put your message here, 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 and here, your click-through rate's going to be really high in all those places, and you're going to get a better return because people will have seen it in more places. And we know our audiences are different in those places, so you're going to get a bunch of different kinds of people in all those places. So it's really about like the education of the person you're selling to, and just offering the kind of like package that includes lots of dates in it, or a 3-month commitment or something like that.
And related to that, do you do creative for them to make sure it's more impactful, or do you just not have time?
We often would do spec work for them ahead of time, so we would come with the ad, like this is what it would look like. And part of that was because our ads were weird, like they were different than most ads, and so we wanted to be able to show people what it was going to look like. Like we were selling Instagram ads, and advertisers were like, I want to be on Instagram, but I don't know what to do. So we would come with spec. So often advertisers would say, I want that, I just want that, just do this thing. And so we would do it. If it was an agency, for example, they would often have their own creative they wanted to do, and we would just take that. If it was really bad and we didn't think it was going to perform, we would edit and then send back and be like, we think this would work better. And if they really wanted to fight about it, that's fine. They can do whatever they want. But we did try to edit to make it more engaging for our audience, because we knew our audience best, and you all know your audience best, and like advocating about that with an advertiser is important because it means that your click-through rates will go up and they'll buy more ads.
Thank you.
Some of the publishers that I work with offer the creative as an additional add-on service.
Hi, I'm Aurora from Bay City News Foundation. Thanks for talking about the Facebook lead gen. The advice you gave was really helpful. I started trying to get into that and was immediately overwhelmed. Are there like cheat sheets or like step-by-step how-to guides for people who are like completely novice at this? Because I'm a development manager, so I work in fundraising, and this type of like marketing is totally like not in my wheelhouse. But I know that it's important, and I see that it works. So if there's like a kind of like Facebook lead gen for dummies, I would love to know what that is.
While Kim was talking, I was thinking the same thing about Google Ads for Dummies,
Yeah.
because I feel that way. So I can take Facebook. I was in the same boat and have learned just by doing and making mistakes and getting it wrong and being like, why isn't this working? And Google has been my friend, like Facebook lead gen ads, how to, and getting things wrong. I would say that the easiest thing I found is to use the creative that we already have done through Instagram and Facebook, like I showed. So if you can take what's already existing inside the account and just turn it into an ad, that seems to be really effective, and it's easier on you as the person who's having to like build all these things. I don't know if you have advice about that.
Yeah, I think the same applies for Twitter as well. For Google Ads, I mean, they have pretty good documentation, and then, yeah, like you Google it, and sometimes you find like a helpful YouTube video, some kind of a blog post, and then trial and error, and just, like keep tweaking it, and then hopefully you get it right.
Send me an email.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Renata Hill, and I just launched Mood Fuel News to cover mental health in Colorado. And I am in experimentation mode with my newsletter, and I have really high open rates, which is great, 70 to in the 80s, but very low, like 4% going to the website. So my assumption, and I don't know if it's right or not, but is that people want the content in the newsletter because they don't want to go to the website. So I'm wondering, and this is a much more basic question, is there some kind of rule or guideline or something that you can tell me about what works best as far as presenting content? So for example, I've tried excerpts, and I've tried bookmarks with just one sentence, and I've tried whole articles in the newsletter, and I've asked people to give me feedback, and my friends say, this is great, but I need to know more helpful feedback, and I was just wondering if you could provide any guidance on that. Thanks.
So the first thing I would say is, do you have enough links in your newsletter? So that would be the first thing to look at. And kind of my standard guidance is, do you have 6 to 10 irresistible stories in there? And it's really obvious for folks how to click through. Second thing I would say is this really depends on the strategy of your newsletter. I think for most of our news organizations, the strategy is going to be the newsletter gets people back to the website to read the content, and hopefully they read the story they click through and then something else. That we're trying to build habits, we're trying to build stickiness, and that the goal of the newsletter is to drive people back to the website where they're going to read and consume the journalism. However, there are exceptions to that. So I've got a publisher right now who has a newsletter that is book reviews. And the goal there is not to have folks click through from the newsletter back to the website, but to actually read and digest it's like a form of a letter from the book editor inside the newsletter itself. And our goal there, the way we're measuring that is really high open rates, which is a little suspect because of all the foolishness that Apple's put us through the last year with Apple Mail. But that aside, the goal there is to get people to open it and read it, because we want to build as big a books newsletter as we can so that we can turn around and sell sponsored emails to book publishers. And so our strategy there is not to get people to go back to the website, but to actually read the journalism inside the newsletter. But I think probably 90% of the time, the strategy for our news organizations is to get people back to the site. And the biggest variable there is, do you have enough links, and do you have irresistible content?
Well, and sorry, Kim. The other piece of that is know what the goal of your newsletter is, right? Like, is it to get people back to the website, or is it to keep them inside and get, like the How to Tucson course was another one where the goal was for somebody to become a member. So everything was inside the newsletter. We weren't trying to get them back to the website.
Yeah, I was going to add to that as well that, you can have a perfectly fine newsletter product that you can consume within the inbox, and that's a happy experience for readers, and it works as like a relationship trust building vehicle. And over time, this is a little bit harder to measure, but you of course have your hard data, you have the numbers, but you might also get some qualitative data in terms of like, do they respond back to you? Do they tell you how much they like it? Well, that means to me that's a successful newsletter, to be honest, because you can get it. It can be a direct like two-way conversation with your readers, and there's a lot of value in that as well.
Hi, I'd like for you to talk a little bit more about how someone found How to Tucson. Did you partner with someone? Like, is there an agency in your community that's like, here's all the new people? Like, how did you find? Like, how did that introduction process start, and did you work with someone else to create that value around there? Because it's a very interesting product, but I'm a little stuck on that.
So we used our own products heavily. So a lot of it was organic because we knew newcomers were finding us in the first place. And so we were also using Opt-in Monster, and we were putting those messages on. We were showing them to people who were coming from search because our hypothesis was that people coming from search were looking for something, and we had a better shot of hitting a newcomer that way than somebody who was already subscribed. So that was one way. There was a program in Tucson this was in the pandemic when we were getting a lot of new people coming because they could work remotely. So we actually worked a little bit with Startup Tucson, who was doing a program where they would try to encourage people to come live in Tucson by giving them bonus money. And so we did do a little bit of trade in their newsletter, another example of like using a newsletter to promote a newsletter. And then we did Facebook lead generation with really specific targeting, looking for people who were not in Tucson already. So we were doing a lot of like zip code exclusion in some of our like setting up our segments, and we were looking for people whose city was not Tucson but had searched for Tucson or had some interest in something that was in Tucson. So we were being really thoughtful about our targeting. And then the third way, the way that was most effective, honestly, was putting it on our already existing content that were stories that we knew would be helpful for somebody who was new to the city, because we had a lot of that content already. And so we were putting the pop-ups, as Kim talked about, like just putting the ask for that specific newsletter on targeted stories. And that was something that seems easy, but we don't do a lot. Like, we had a food newsletter. Every story in the food section got an ask for that food newsletter specifically. I think we have about 3 minutes, so we maybe have one more question, maybe two if we're fast.
Okay, this is fast. So 2 questions about in-kind swaps. 1, do you label them as ads, or are they more organic looking? And 2, we've done in-kind swaps, and they're very labor intensive in terms of like back and forth, and I don't know. But like, is there a way to make it less or get more bang for your buck? And I'm realizing one thing you mentioned already was we'll do like one swap, but it sounded like you will do ongoing swaps with one partner, which is already smarter than what we were doing. But is there anything else like that to get more out of this conversation that you have to do with every organization that can take weeks?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that can be very labor intensive, especially when you first set them up. I would definitely label them as advertising or sponsorship or whatever it is, because that's what it is. I mean, unless you're really like partnering with an organization like on a partnership basis. But one way to, like if you set it up as an ongoing swap, it scales better, right? And like you also get more data in terms of like figuring out what works for you, and you can report it back to them, what works for them. So, if like, I mean, there are organizations that, oftentimes they don't ever have advertising. So for them, it's kind of like a no-brainer because they want to be in front of your audience. And for you, if you do sell advertising, of course, you need to make sure that you have space available, right? So one thing that we always do is that we say very much upfront, like, okay, this is all under the condition that we have space available. If we do have a paying advertiser coming in, of course, we need to prioritize them, right? So that relationship building and like setting the expectation right from the beginning. But then just say like, whenever we have something available, sure, like, we're happy to take you in, and that scales pretty well.
Are you saying it's easier to swap with newsletters that don't really do other advertising because they don't have to think about their inventory? Or is that like a good rule of thumb?
Well, yes and no, because then also they might not know what to do, right? And like also always have them send you a test email of what their email is going to look like, because sometimes it can be a little wonky, or like the image is pixelated or something like that, or the link doesn't work, or whatever it is, right? So that's another tip that I would always try to make sure to get that test email before they send it out.
One more quick question.
All right. Hi, thank you, ladies. I'm kind of curious about how you guys determined which platform, email marketing platform, was best suited to accomplish these different goals that you guys talked about, whether it was membership or, ad content. Do you use different platforms for different things, or is there one robust one that you use to accomplish everything?
I'll say really quickly, we use MailChimp now, great, but we used our own kind of in-house platform at the legacy newspaper I was at, and it's just a matter of, like, what are your goals and how can you make it do the thing you want? So I think you could use almost any email platform. Everybody else's email platform is always better than your own, is how I've kind of, the grass is always greener, right? You're always like, that thing's better than mine. But I think as long as you know what it is you want to do and can kind of like make the thing do what you want, the one you have is the right one. But
Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with MailChimp. Most of my publishers use MailChimp. It's very easy for operators to learn. It integrates with a lot of other tools. But that said, I think there's more new platforms coming out, and probably the most important thing is can it integrate well with other things? And so MailChimp works great with Opt-in Monster, which serves pop-ups. It works great with Memberful, which allows you to do member giving and paid subscription. So it integrates really well with WordPress. So that is a big advantage.
that's a good tip.
I would just add that, especially if you don't have a technical team and you don't have like a ton of people who work on the marketing and the actual production of the newsletter, also use a tool that has a nice UI on the back end that is like easy to use. That's like one of the things that I have worked on systems that are really clunky, very powerful, but really clunky. And I am very much a fan of the ones that are actually easier.
Also a great tip. All right, y'all, thank you so much for coming. I hope that your newsletters improve.